I am by the side of the Prince of B City, Louis, the most infatuated and obedient girl. No matter how he hurts me, I never thought of leaving. Until the last time, he threw away a fortune for his Cinderella. But he was too stingy to lend me $50,000 life-saving dollars. Heartbroken, I threw away the ring and walked away. Friends advised him to coax me back. Louis casually laughed. What's the rush, she'll come back on her own in less than a day. On the third day, he couldn't resist and called me. Enough of playing around, come home quickly. But the voice on the phone was a very familiar male voice. Keep it down, Stacy was exhausted last night, still sleeping, don't wake her up. Chapter 1. I stand behind the lively crowd, staring blankly at the scene in front of me. Louis is holding a slender, timid girl. A sophomore student, Janet, who comes from a humbler background than me. She is the girl he's currently doting on. In the spacious compartment, there are various luxury brand managers and PRs standing around. Clothes, shoes, handbags, jewelry ranging from tens of thousands to tens of millions are showcased by models of different skin tones. As long as Janet glances at something, Louis immediately buys it at any cost. But just half an hour ago, no matter how much I begged, Louis refused to lend me $50,000. He knew I was at the end of my rope, even resorted to borrowing from loan sharks. But he showed no mercy. Suddenly, I was awakened. I had long known that I was nothing but a joke. Although everyone says I am the girlfriend Louis has been with the longest, his treatment of me and other women is very different. Chapter 2. Mr. Remington, that's enough, you've bought too much already. Janet's eyes shine brightly, innocent and joyful. Louis bends down and kisses her cheek. As long as you like it, as long as you're happy. Mr. Remington, you're so kind. Janet looks at him with admiration and infatuation. This kind of look undoubtedly pleases the prince. He smiles contentedly, takes Janet's hand, and stands up. Let's go, let's continue playing somewhere else. Louis. Seeing him about to leave with Janet, I finally couldn't help but call out to him. Louis hugged Janet, and Janet curiously looked at me. Mr. Remington, who is she? I held my breath. In the empty depths of my heart, only a tiny bit of hope remained. Louis flicked away the cigarette ashes, looked down at me condescendingly, and then pinched Janet's soft cheek. Silly girl, she's just a clingy piece of trash, stinky, stubborn, and annoying, don't bother with her. Janet widened her eyes, pursed her lips again. Then she looked at me, with a hint of disdainful sympathy in her eyes. I shifted my gaze, looking at Louis. I met him when I was 12. Fell in love with him when I was 17. Now, at 22, a whole decade has passed. I thought I would always like him. But now, it's been so easily and casually cut off. Chapter 3. I lowered my eyes, staring at the ring that didn't quite fit on my finger. After a moment, I took off the ring. Louis frowned slightly. Stacy. As he said my name, the ring made an arc, landing in the trash can. I let out a sigh, lifted my face to look at him, and smiled. Louis, I won't bother you anymore. As you wish, let's break up. Silence filled the compartment. As I opened the door, there was a muffled sound of something heavy being overturned behind me. Stacy, you know my temper, you better think it over. Louis's voice sounded full of anger. In the past, I would have been scared into silence, obediently yielding. But now, I didn't even turn my head. Well, I've thought it over. With that, I opened the door and left the compartment directly. Chapter 4. The summer night's thunderstorm arrived as if on cue. Lightning tore through the pitch-black night, and thunder rumbled. Someone softly reminded. Louis, do you want to go outside and check? Looks like it's going to pour outside. Louis's eyes gradually filled with a thin anger. He held on to Janet, saying, Don't mind her. Louis. Taking a glass of wine, Louis casually smiled. What's the rush? Just wait and see, in less than a day, she'll come back on her own. As he finished speaking, a torrential rain began outside the window. It's pouring rain, looks like Stacy didn't bring an umbrella. Someone murmured softly, and Louis looked out the window. His brow furrowed deeply, his thin lips pressed into a line. Mr. Remington. You hurt me. Janet's voice timidly sounded. Louis let go of her, then pinched Janet's face again. Be good, let's continue drinking. But the next moment, he suddenly kicked the coffee table in front of him hard. Janet shrank back in fear. Mr. Remington. Get out, both of you, get out. Janet cried in grievance, but was still pulled out by someone. Louis stood up and walked to the window. The rain was pouring like a waterfall, everything was a blur. Chapter 5. As soon as I stepped out of the hotel, I was drenched in the rain. My whole body was soaked, so I stopped hiding and running. Just walking like that, I suddenly stopped in my tracks. I slowly crouched down and hugged myself. In the pouring rain, crying silently. I don't know how long I cried, until the rain inexplicably stopped above my head. I belatedly raised my head. Deeper than the ink-like night, were the eyes of the man at this moment. Edward held an umbrella, standing by my side. As I looked over, he slightly bent down. His slender fingers held my arm and pulled me up. Mr. Lancaster? I was somewhat surprised. My thin dress clung to my wet body. His gaze shamelessly fell upon it. I shivered slightly, wanting to withdraw my hand to cover myself. The phone in my bag started vibrating again. I knew it was the hospital calling to remind me to pay. My wet fingers had already tightly grasped Edward's sleeve at some point. Mr. Lancaster, could you lend me $50,000? I looked up at him. With a sense of humiliation and despair of risking it all. Chapter 6. Edward held the umbrella, his gaze slowly falling on my face. But he didn't speak for a long time. The rain tapped against the umbrella incessantly. Under this umbrella, it seemed like a small isolated world. The eldest son of the Lancasters, unruly, unconventional, and unpredictable in his actions. But unbeatable with his high intelligence and outstanding abilities. In this circle of B City, he even faintly overshadowed Louis. In fact, friends around us all knew that on the surface, the two were polite, but in private, they had no dealings, clearly not getting along. And I used to be Louis's girlfriend. Edward probably dislikes me too. My fingers curled, wanting to pull back. Edward suddenly let go. By the time his hand came down again, he had already held my waist through the soaked clothes. Before I could react, I fell into his arms. Stacy, what will you use as exchange? This was the first thing he said tonight. Chapter 7. Edward pulled me out of the bathtub. And when he handed me a bowl of steaming ginger soup, I was still a bit dazed. From him transferring a 7-figure sum to me getting into his car, arriving at his villa in the resort mountains. And now, sitting across from him in his bathrobe, drinking ginger soup. The whole process took only about 3 hours. I held the bowl. I didn't dare to look at the man in front of me. He wore a dark blue silk robe, revealing a sturdy chest. As I drank the soup, he leaned back in his chair watching me. His peach blossom eyes were very charming, coupled with his lazy posture at the moment. It seemed like he was solidifying his reputation as the most unruly man in B City. After finishing the soup, I sat rigidly, like a well-behaved elementary school student. Edward chuckled. In the next moment, he held me horizontally. Why are you so light? Don't you usually eat? I eat less. In his arms, my whole body felt stiff. Louis liked slender girls. Over the years, I had hardly touched rice. I had long forgotten what it felt like to be full. Stacy, you'd look even better with a little more weight. Edward placed me on his large bed. His tall figure leaned down and he kissed me. As his cool lips touched mine, I closed my eyes, feeling my ears turning red. Edward's eyes held a playful smile as he toyed with my earlobe. Has Louis never kissed you? You're so easily embarrassed. Louis rarely kissed me. The few times he did, it was only on the forehead or cheek. He didn't like me, and of course, he didn't want to touch me. With my eyes closed, the side of my neck and ears felt hot and flushed. As Edward untied my bathrobe belt, I timidly grabbed his hand with trembling fingers. What's wrong? He immediately stopped his actions and held my trembling hand. Edward, it's just. Can you please be gentle later, I'm scared. My fingers trembled violently, the redness fading from my face, leaving a pale color. I bit my lip hard, opened my eyes to glance at him, then nervously turned my face away. Edward gently massaged my back. Don't worry. He chuckled softly in my ear. But his kiss became noticeably stronger. I didn't say anything more. Just closed my eyes tightly, gritting my teeth. Until the end. I couldn't bear it anymore, so I opened my mouth and bit his shoulder, tears streaming down. He seemed to notice something, abruptly stopping his actions. Stacy, is this your first time? Chapter 8. I didn't speak. Just lightly nodded. Edward's movements involuntarily slowed down. His peach blossom eyes, once filled with desire, were now incredibly gentle. He cupped my face, wiping away the tears on my eyelashes, sincerely apologizing to me. I'm sorry, Stacy. He held me close to his chest, gently kissing and caressing me. Does it hurt? I nodded again. It truly hurt a lot, many times more than I had imagined. It's my fault. Edward held my face, his gentle kisses accompanied by a sigh of pity. I didn't speak anymore, just resting my face against Edward's chest. Tears kept flowing out incessantly. When I was 20, Louis got drunk once. His friends called me to come pick him up. When I arrived, he was sitting on the couch with his clothes disheveled. One hand holding a phone, constantly unlocking and locking the screen. The air was thick with the smell of alcohol and smoke. His eyes were red, probably completely drunk, his mind in a fog. Stacy, come here. Rarely gentle, it seemed like the first time he called me by my full name. I walked over to him, and he grabbed my hand. He took out a ring from his pocket. Be my girlfriend. He said it without waiting for my answer, forcefully sliding the ring onto my finger. The ring was a bit big, not my size. The design was simple and plain. But I was still very happy. On the way back, I kept looking at it over and over again. Perhaps I was smiling too happily, too joyfully. Louis's mood inexplicably improved. He hugged me and kissed me for the first time. That was our 8th year of knowing each other. That was the most wonderful spring night of my life. The moment Louis put the ring on me, I silently vowed in my heart, Stacy, it's him for life. Chapter 9. Stacy. Perhaps my tears were just too many. Edward seemed a bit helpless and at a loss. Please don't cry. He wiped my tears, but my tears just wouldn't stop. I'm not doing this anymore. His voice was a bit hoarse, his forehead against mine, gently rubbing. In my memory, Edward wasn't this gentle of a man. There were countless socialites in our circle who admired him. He seemed to have feelings for each one. But I had actually seen how he dismissed those young ladies in private. Cold, indifferent, merciless, yet somehow unassailable. As if he had done no wrong, it was just that you, this flower, shouldn't desire the alluring spring breeze. He was simply a breeze passing through. Just passing by every flower in the garden. There were other girls crying even more miserably than I was at the moment. Edward didn't even spare them a glance. As he walked away, all he left was, Miss, crying ruins your makeup, it's not dignified. But now he was comforting me. Surprised, I lifted my face from his chest. Is my crying really that undignified? Edward raised an eyebrow at my words, then bent down to gently wipe away the tears from the corner of my eye. Stacy, you're so beautiful, it breaks my heart. His sweet words came effortlessly, yet carried a seductive tenderness. Why? I murmured. Edward held my face, softly chuckled, but didn't answer. Come on, I'll carry you to take a bath. And he actually did. Warm water will make you feel better, he said, bending to lift me up. But I closed my eyes, grabbed his arm, and pulled him back into my embrace. Edward, I won't go back on my word. After tonight, we'll part ways. Chapter 10. Edward suddenly stopped. No response. I was a bit surprised, opening my eyes to look at him. His eyes, which had been soft before, gradually turned cold. As if reverting back to his former reckless self. Part ways? He stared at me, repeating my words from before. Uncomfortable, I averted my gaze. I've returned the extra money to you, I just want 50,000. Edward seemed to be amused by my words. I thought for a moment, then whispered. If you're not happy, then I'll save up enough money to pay you back. Stacy. Edward pinched my chin, silencing me directly. If you continue, I might just become the first man in B City to be driven to death by a woman. I caught a faint bitter scent from Edward. Yet the lingering scent was still enchanting and alluring. I could sense his slight anger. But throughout, he remained gentle. Later, in a daze, I couldn't help but think. He didn't seem to be the man I had previously thought he was. No wonder more women liked him than Lewis. Chapter 11. I stayed at Edward's villa for a full 3 days. Several messages from mutual friends in our circle came through. Stacy, where have you been these days? Lewis is very angry, you should come back quickly. You've blocked Lewis's WeChat number? Stacy, have you thought about the consequences of what you're doing? What will you do if Lewis is really upset? I didn't reply, tossing my phone aside. After deciding to break up, I no longer considered these questions. In fact, my relationship with Lewis had long been on the rocks. Held together solely by my efforts. On the final night, I had just come out of the bathroom when Edward walked in with a bottle of red wine. Have a drink with me, Stacy. He sat on the couch. For some reason, I felt like there was a hint of desolate loneliness in his eyes at that moment. My tolerance for alcohol wasn't great, and I quickly became slightly tipsy. Edward lifted me up, I was afraid of falling, so I quickly held onto his neck tightly. Seems a bit heavy. Indeed, I had indulged in eating these past few days, and my stomach seemed to have gained a layer of fat. It's comfortable to hold you. Edward laid me down on the bed. The bedroom lights dimmed, and it started raining outside again. 3 days of getting to know each other. The initial awkwardness and discomfort had long disappeared. The steady rain continued until the middle of the night before finally stopping. I lay on the pillow, long hair cascading down. Edward leaned against the headboard, tilting my head to drink water. His fingers twirled around the end of my hair, somewhat absent-minded. I didn't have the strength to speak either. In the end, I fell into a deep sleep on his chest. The phone kept vibrating, but I slept soundly, completely unaware. Edward freed up a hand and picked up my phone. The number wasn't Lewis's, but apart from him, there probably wasn't anyone else. Edward stared at the digits, and when the phone rang persistently again, he slid to answer. Stacy, had enough fun yet? It's time to come home. Lewis's voice carried a hint of impatience. Even when he was trying to be conciliatory, it was still a condescending gesture. A smirk tugged at the corner of Edward's lips. Keep it down. Edward gently patted my back. I wearily opened my eyes, then drifted off to sleep again. Stacy is exhausted, still asleep. Mr. Remington, please keep your voice down and don't wake her up. Chapter 12. After Edward finished speaking, there was a deathly silence on the other end of the line. Edward patiently waited for the other person to speak. After about half a minute. Edward, why is Stacy with you? That's a question for Mr. Remington himself. Edward lowered his gaze to me, sleeping peacefully in his arms. Did you touch her? Edward, did you fucking touch her? Lewis finally broke down, his voice hoarse and trembling. Stacy got caught in the rain, not feeling well. Mr. Remington, don't paint me as such an animal. After saying that, he hung up the phone directly and turned it off. Those eyes that always seemed too indifferent. Now, quietly watching me, after a while. He chuckled self-deprecatingly. Just a moment ago, he could have easily slapped Lewis hard. But looking at the gentle and serene face in his arms, he inexplicably changed his mind. I was completely unaware of all this. The next day, I packed up and Edward drove me back to City B. As I got off the car, I whispered my thanks to him. Leaning against the car seat, his shirt collar slightly disheveled, Edward's peach blossom eyes held a seductive smile. Stacy, you're welcome to come back and see me anytime. I lowered my eyes, thinking about the chaos and indulgence of the past 3 days, my cheeks still flushed. Mr. Lancaster, goodbye. The smile in Edward's eyes faded slightly. The window slowly rolled up, the car started. I stood on the roadside, watching his car fade into the distance. Deep down, I knew clearly that there would be no more involvement between Edward and me in the future. I went to the hospital to visit Denise. She miraculously recovered once again and was temporarily out of danger. Seeing her in good spirits, I finally breathed a sigh of relief. When I was only 12 years old, after my mother passed away, my father and grandparents forced me to drop out of school. They thought I was a girl and going to school was a waste of money. They planned to make me work with my aunt and uncle to earn money. And then, in a few years, marry me off to a family that gave a good dowry. It was Denise and her mother who secretly gave me some money and had relatives send me to the county middle school overnight. The middle school principal and teachers protected me together. They argued with my father and grandparents and managed to drive them away, allowing me to continue my studies. The following year, Lewis and his mother came to that small town for charity work. I was the top student, so Lewis's mother began to sponsor me. That year, I also met Lewis for the first time. He was handsome, like a precious gem. A bit arrogant, yet not unlikable. When Lewis's mother took him back to City B, he said something to me. Little girl, see you in City B. This sentence planted a seed in my heart. From then on, I worked hard, forgetting to eat and sleep, never daring to slack off for a moment. At 17, I got into one of the best universities in City B. At 20, Lewis said, Stacy, be my girlfriend. When I was 21, Denise's mother fell seriously ill. When I found out, I begged her to come to City B for treatment. I used all my scholarship money and savings from work. But her illness was too severe, and she passed away soon after. Even more unfortunate, shortly after the funeral. Denise also fell ill, the same illness as her mother. I couldn't come up with any more money, so I reluctantly borrowed from loan sharks. I saved Denise once from the gates of hell. But there was a second time, a third time, each more dangerous than the last. I had no choice but to turn to Lewis. Not only did he refuse to lend me a single penny, but he also humiliated me to the extreme. I was on the verge of collapse. You're not obligated to lend me money, but after knowing each other for so many years, you should at least ask me why I'm in such dire need of money. You shouldn't humiliate me like this. But all I received was his mocking words. Can't handle humiliation? Then just leave, no one's stopping you. I had one more wish. In my hometown, that closed, impoverished remote mountain village, there were many girls like Denise and me. They had no chance to study, even at a young age, they had to work to support their families. As they grew older, they were married off casually, in exchange for a dowry to continue supporting their brothers. Drained of every drop of blood. I wanted to save Denise, to save more girls like her there. But now, I, with my limited strength, was trapped in a predicament myself. Chapter 13. As I left the hospital, I made up my mind to give up on further studies and find a decent paying job. On the way back, my phone suddenly rang a few times. I checked the phone and saw a message from a mutual friend in our circle. There were 10 transfer messages. I looked at the countless zeros and knew it was from Louis. But deep down, there wasn't even a slight ripple in my heart. If that night, I had asked Louis for 50,000 yuan. If he hadn't refused and then splurged on Janet. Maybe I wouldn't have had the heart to leave him. The summer cotton coat, the winter fan, were all belated and useless. I didn't open the messages. A few minutes later, a friend called. After some thought, I answered. Stacy. Louis's voice sounded somewhat hoarse and heavy. In just 3 days, it seemed like he had transformed from a boyfriend into someone from another world. What's up? Where are you now? Getting ready to go home. On the other end of the phone, Louis seemed to breathe a sigh of relief instantly. I'll be waiting for you at home, he said before hanging up. This so-called home was probably the only generosity Louis had shown me. After my 4th year, I moved into this apartment to prepare for further studies. The house belonged to Louis. But there were some things inside that were mine. Since we had broken up, it was only natural for me to clear out my belongings. Chapter 14. As I opened the door, I was momentarily stunned. The air in the room was stale. It was filled with a pungent smell of smoke and alcohol. Louis was sitting on the sofa, his shirt wrinkled. His hair was unkempt, showing no signs of grooming. I put on some slippers and walked in. Stacy. Louis stood up and walked towards me, arms outstretched to hug me. But I dodged. Louis, we've already broken up. I came back today just to take my things. I looked at him calmly. He probably hadn't rested much these past few days. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he looked worn out. The shirt he was wearing was still the same one from 3 days ago. This surprised me greatly. Louis was someone who was very particular about cleanliness. Stacy, you're still angry. I shook my head. I was just fooling around with them, you know that. Louis reached out his hand to pull me towards him. Once again, I evaded his touch. Louis, I don't care how you play with others, but this time I'm not playing around. I looked at him, the person I secretly admired in my youth. The one I fantasized about spending a lifetime with. But now, we were strangers. Deep down, of course, it was hard not to feel sad. But after so many years, I already knew this would be the outcome. Deep down, I felt calm and at peace. So, you don't need to explain anything to me. After saying that, I walked past him towards the room. Stacy. I stopped but didn't turn around. You know that Edward and I are not on good terms. Are you angry with me, deliberately trying to provoke me, seeking revenge on me, right? Louis walked over and grabbed my shoulders with both hands. Stacy, no one knows how much you love me better than I do. He said this with such certainty. Even in his attempts to salvage the situation, he was domineering. But I became even more clear-headed. What could be more absurd than loving someone who you know once loved you deeply, but now disregards, disrespects, and hurts you without a care, making a mockery of you? I pushed his hands away. It has nothing to do with Edward. Louis, it's me who wants to break up with you. I turned around and spoke earnestly. It's me, I no longer like you. Chapter 15. After I packed up and left that day, Louis never tried to contact me again. He was the prince of the city, adored by many. And I was just a lonely girl who had received his mother's favor. I started sending out resumes and looking for a job. With my qualifications, I quickly received interview invitations. On the day of the interview, as I looked at the LED screen downstairs, I saw Edward. He was dressed in a black business suit, surrounded by several executives and secretaries. His serious demeanor, without a smile, appeared incredibly stern. I felt as if I had traveled to another world. As if that man who shared a bed with me for 3 days in the mountain villa on a rainy night was just a character from my dreams. But I quickly came back to reality. Between Edward and me, we silently turned a page on the day I returned to the city. I was in it for the life-saving money. And he, perhaps, was only interested because I was once his archenemy's woman. He was curious, finding it exciting. Chapter 16. I rented a new apartment, very close to the company, but small and old. I took some time over the weekend to visit Denise at the hospital. She recovered quite well this time. When I went to see her, she tearfully told me that her little sister was getting married. Just an 18-year-old girl, about to marry the pig slaughterer from the neighboring village. I held Denise's hand tightly. Let her run away, come here, find any job, she can support herself. Denise just shook her head with tears in her eyes. We both knew how difficult it was. The vast mountains were the shackles choking their fate. How lucky must one be to escape like me? As I left the hospital, I received a call from the company's HR. She apologized and informed me that the company ultimately did not hire me. I asked for the reason, but then suddenly realized. It must be Louis. After the call ended, a message came through. Stacy, I will make you come back to me obediently. I stood on the roadside, even though it was the height of summer. I felt icy all over, my fingers trembling. I looked dazedly at the tree shade and patches of light above me. So, this is the man I've loved for 5 years. The Louis who protected me when I was mocked for being poor and ignorant at B University in the city. The Louis who stayed by my bedside all night when I was sick, clumsily making soup for me. The Louis who scolded me, humiliated me, but then, after getting drunk, held me and begged for forgiveness. Countless images, countless versions of him overlapping, but now becoming blurry, unrecognizable. It turns out that when everyone is young, they fall in love with a perfect opposite they imagine. The Louis I've loved all these years is just the Louis the First repeatedly beautified in my mind, the Louis the First repeatedly deceived myself into believing. Chapter 17. I deleted the contact information of all mutual friends in Louis's circle. Facing repeated job rejections. I simply went to set up a stall under the overpass with the neighbor next door. There must be an income to sustain a living. And with Denise still not fully recovered, my heart has been hanging on that side. But what makes me more anxious is the high-interest loan I borrowed before. I'm increasingly strapped for cash, struggling even to pay the high interest. Fortunately, the stall brings in daily income. I almost starved myself, saving almost 1,000 yuan after a week. Just as things were looking up, in the second week of setting up the stall with my neighbor, the urban management officers arrived. Other vendors with experience managed to flee in time. But my little cart and goods were all confiscated. Stacy, are you okay? Seeing me standing there motionless, pale-faced, the neighbor seemed a bit startled. I'm fine, you all go back first, I want to be alone for a bit. I sat on the bench by the river for a long time. Until my phone rang. Another unfamiliar number. I knew it was Louis calling. I answered directly. Stacy, I'm at the hospital right now. I stood up instantly. Louis? Your sister is named Denise, right? What do you want, Louis? Why did you come to me? I've asked the doctor, her illness could relapse at any time, it's very dangerous. In Louis's voice, there was an air of arrogance. Stacy, as long as you obediently come back, I'll immediately hire the best doctor in the entire city of B to treat her. What if I don't go back? Stacy, you know very well what kind of person I am. From childhood to now, I've always gotten what I wanted by any means necessary. But I am a human being, with blood, flesh, thoughts, and dignity. Stacy, I was wrong in the past, I will change. I knew that for Louis, this was as close to an apology as he could get. But I was no longer the Stacy who could be easily swayed by a few words from him. It's too late, Louis. It's not too late, I know everything, nothing happened between you and Edward. Stacy, let's reconcile, everything in the past, we can turn a new leaf, I won't bring it up again. Did Edward tell you that? I was slightly surprised. He and Louis were arch enemies, or so I had thought. He did. He lied to you, Louis. That night, for 50,000 yuan, I had already sold myself to him. My voice was calm, even at the end, it carried a faint hint of a smile. So, you see, we have absolutely no chance left. There was silence on the other end of the phone. I gazed at the shimmering river surface in the distance. Tear open the seemingly healed wound. Stacy, you're lying to me, you love me, you wouldn't do this kind of thing. Louis, in this world, nothing is absolutely impossible. I admit, in those years before, I really loved you. But later, when I left with Edward, I knew that I had completely let you go. Stacy. Louis, let's part on good terms. And don't use someone I care about to threaten me. Don't make me hate you for a lifetime. After saying that, I hung up the phone. Louis quickly called again, and I blocked that number. Chapter 18. That late night, a friend called me. Stacy, please, come and see Louis. He drank a lot, so much that he's bleeding from his stomach, he's in the hospital now. Louis has been calling your name, Stacy, please, can you both sit down and talk things out? These days, there hasn't been any random girl around Louis, he's cleaned up his act. Also, the ring you threw away, Louis found it. Stacy, Louis refuses to get in for, he's causing a scene wanting to leave the hospital, we really don't know what to do. I interrupted him. Call his parents and let them know, this is not a small matter. Stacy. You really don't want him anymore? No, I don't. I was about to hang up. My friend stopped me. Stacy, we really didn't expect things to turn out like this, Louis is truly repentant this time. Well, then his future girlfriend or wife should be very happy. Without saying anything more, I hung up after that call. I thought to myself, it's time to change this number that I've had for so many years. Chapter 19. After changing my number, I received a call from Edward. It had been nearly a month since I returned to City B. Hearing his voice again, I couldn't help but feel a moment of confusion. Stacy. Edward hesitated. Shouldn't you come to the hospital to see me? You're sick? I got beaten up. Beaten up? Did you get into a fight with someone? Exactly, someone else picked a fight with me. Louis? Yes. I understood in my heart, feeling guilty as well. Edward covered up those 3 days for me. But I laid it all out to Louis. How could this proud and arrogant prince swallow his pride like this? I went to the hospital. At the entrance, gritting my teeth, I bought a bouquet of flowers and a fruit basket, the cheapest kind. Edward was indeed injured, with a cut and bruise at the corner of his eye. But even in his striped patient gown, he looked colorful. He still seemed a bit carefree and unruly. When he saw me come in, he raised an eyebrow, and the nurses and assistants in the room all left. Feeling a bit embarrassed, I still handed him the things I bought. Mr. Lancaster, the items are cheap, but they are also a token of my appreciation, please don't disdain them. Edward glanced at the shabbily packaged flowers and the slightly wilted fruits in the basket. He didn't show any hint of disdain. Peel me an apple. I washed the fruit, sat by his bed, and began peeling the apple. But before I finished peeling one apple, the hospital room's door was suddenly kicked open from the outside. I was startled, my finger trembled, and the knife cut my fingertip. Edward abruptly got up, grabbed my bleeding hand, and bent down to suck on the wound. Instinctively, I tried to pull my hand back, but Edward held onto it tighter. Louis stood there, disheveled, with bruises on his face, and one arm in a bandage. His eyes were bloodshot, looking disheveled to the extreme. And he was crumbling to the extreme. Stacy. His voice hoarse, calling my name. With some difficulty, he took out a jewelry box from his pocket. This is the pink heart-shaped diamond you always loved, Stacy, I personally flew overseas to get it for you. Come here and put on the ring, we'll go get our license tomorrow. Finally, I turned to look at him. Louis's once weary and dim eyes instantly lit up. Stacy, will you come over? He reached out his hand to me. Louis. The pink diamond was something I liked when I was 20, now, I no longer like diamonds. Stacy, I'm sorry, I really didn't know. You never said. He seemed a bit lost, regretful, and awkwardly withdrew his hand. What's the point of saying these things? He never cared about my joys and sorrows. Just go, Louis. Don't bother me anymore. Who would have thought that one day, Stacy would say these words to Louis? His face darkened gradually. Is it because of Edward? What did he give you? Money, or jewelry? Do you think he likes you, that he's sincere towards you? Louis's expression gradually became frantic. If you weren't my girlfriend, would he even give you a second glance? A man like him, who can have any woman he wants, why would he treat a woman that someone else is tired of nicely? I stood up and with all my strength, slapped him hard. Louis, don't make me regret it, detest you, who once genuinely liked you. What did I say wrong? Louis raised his hand to touch his face, but his gaze passed over me and landed on Edward. She secretly had a crush on me when she was 17, and she was with me when she turned 18. For a full 5 years now, no matter how many women I change, she never leaves me. So Edward, do you think she would like you? She's just using you to provoke me. Believe it or not, Stacy will come back to me sooner or later. And you will be kicked aside by her. The more he spoke, the more desperate he seemed, as if by saying this, he could convince himself to believe it. Convince Edward to despise me. Hit upon my pain. I really didn't want to hear these words anymore. Turning around, I walked to Edward's bedside. Edward still had that somewhat unserious look on his face. Stacy, would you kick me aside? I didn't answer. I just bent down and kissed his somewhat dry lips directly. Chapter 20. I don't know when Louis left. I don't know what expression he had when I kissed Edward in that moment. But Edward clearly enjoyed it. Even though my kiss was still quite inexperienced. He seemed to be thoroughly enjoying it. But after doing something like that in the heat of the moment, I felt a bit at a loss. I'm sorry. After all, there was a bit of using him earlier. Just sorry, no need to take responsibility? Responsibility? I looked at Edward in a daze. He looked back at me, with a debonair yet fearless expression. Yes, first kiss, first time, you took them all, and no responsibility? I was completely dumbfounded. First kiss. First time? Is he trying to fool a 3-year-old? Who doesn't know that Edward is a notorious playboy in City B? Even though he's a year younger than Louis, he's 26 this year. I would never believe it. Yes, first kiss, first time. Edward was unusually serious. He wasn't smiling, and when he got serious, he actually had a charming demeanor. It's just that these charming eyes were too flirtatious. He didn't look like a good man at all. My mind was in complete chaos, and in the end, I didn't know what to say. I turned around and ran away directly. Edward called me, but I didn't pick up. I thought that it was already over between me and Edward. We had completely settled everything. But now, it seems like everything has turned into a mess. Chapter 21. I lay in my small rented room for 2 days. During this time, Edward called me several times. I didn't answer. He also sent me messages and photos. Stacy, I got a facial injury. There were signs of inflammation on the wound on his face, and half of his face was slightly swollen. In the photo, Edward looked both pitiful and aggrieved. There was no trace of his former dashing self. I replied to him. Follow the doctor's advice and take care of your injury. What if my face is really ruined? Edward replied quickly. Without a good-looking face, I'll lose my innocence, and how will I get a wife in the future? Reading this message, for some reason, I couldn't help but smirk and laugh out loud. I placed my phone on my chest and didn't reply to him again. The current Stacy seems to be unable to trust anyone at all. To believe that she will receive favoritism. To believe that she will be as lucky as she was 10 years ago and escape from the remote mountain village. Once again lucky to have a happy life. Moreover, he is Edward. I don't have the confidence to believe that I am the girl who can make him stop in his tracks. And our beginning was not clean. Chapter 22. Louis's mother called me and invited me to dinner. She was a benefactor I met when I was young. She is the kindest and most loving noblewoman I have ever met in my life. When Louis asked me to be his girlfriend back then, I was worried about what Louis's mother would think. After all, my background was too humble. But Louis's mother was surprisingly very happy when she found out. She said to me, "Stacy, I have always been worried about Louis. He is too naive, too playful, and stubborn. You are a good kid, good-looking, and even better at heart. I can rest assured if Louis is with you. But in the end, we still went our separate ways. But in my heart, no matter what happened between me and Louis, I will always remember the kindness of Louis's mother." When I arrived at the restaurant room, pushing open the door, I saw Louis sitting next to his mother. My steps halted. But Louis's mother had already stood up and came over, intimately holding my hand. "Stacy, come in quickly." I could only follow her inside. Louis's mother seemed to be in a particularly good mood. She pulled me to sit next to Louis. "Stacy, Louis said you two are getting married? This is such a big event, why keep it from Auntie?" Louis's mother happily said, and casually took off the jade bracelet on her wrist, wanting to put it on me. I quickly raised my hand to stop her. "Auntie, you've misunderstood. Mom, Stacy and I had a little quarrel, she's still mad at me." Louis interjected. Louis's mother immediately glared at him. "It must be something you did wrong. Stacy has been like my own child, she is the most well-behaved and gentle. I made her mad, I know I was wrong, but Stacy won't forgive me." The corners of Louis's eyes were slightly red, looking at me pitifully. "Stacy, I really know I was wrong, can you give me another chance, please?" Louis's mother was also busy persuading. "Stacy, when I go back, I will definitely teach Louis a lesson. And, if he dares to bully you again in the future, you tell me, I will definitely give him a good beating. This time, for the sake of Auntie's face, forgive him once, okay?" I gently pulled my hand out. Over the years, I could feel that Auntie really cared about me and truly liked me. She wanted me to be her daughter-in-law, not out of insincerity. But unfortunately, I still had to disappoint her in the end. Auntie, Louis and I have already broken up. "Stacy. We will not reconcile again, Auntie, I'm really sorry." Louis's mother's eyes instantly turned red. "Stacy, what exactly happened, you two, how did you end up like this?" I didn't answer. Things change, people change, it seems like a common occurrence in this world. My only mistake was perhaps naively thinking that Louis had feelings for me. But it wasn't until the moment we parted ways that I realized it too late. That unsuitable ring had actually been a reminder for me. Louis wanted me to be a friend. Maybe out of spite towards someone. Maybe just for fun. The owner of the ring was never me. It was just me at that time, deceiving myself and refusing to believe. Seeing Louis's mother like this, I also felt uneasy. "Auntie, I can't have dinner with you. Another time, I'll treat you." I bid farewell. Louis's mother pushed Louis to see me off. "No need, Auntie." I declined Louis's mother, turned around, grabbed my bag, and left. As I left, I heard Louis's mother scolding him in distress. But all of this was no longer my concern. As I approached the elevator, Edward appeared out of nowhere. His face still not fully healed, wearing a hat. Today he was dressed casually, in a t-shirt and sweatpants, looking like a college student who had just left the school gate. But his smile still seemed as charming and wicked as ever. In that instant he pulled me to the side room next to the elevator. Louis happened to come out of the compartment and hurried towards the elevator. "Stacy." He shouted my name loudly. As he was about to reach the door, Edward clicked the lock shut. The room was not lit. When Edward leaned in, the brim of his hat lightly brushed against the top of my head. Stacy, if Lewis can't find you today, will you come with me? Chapter 23. How's your wound? I changed the subject. Edward took off his hat, brought his face closer, letting me see his injury. I almost got disfigured. It looks fine now. I raised my hand, feeling the hard scab forming over the wound. Stacy, it's so itchy. Suddenly, Edward softly whispered in my ear. The doctor won't let me scratch, it's so itchy I can't sleep. He looked at me somewhat pitifully. I've never endured a beating since I was a kid. As the wound heals, it will get itchy, you have to endure it, otherwise scratching it will leave a scar. I comforted him gently. Can you scratch it for me? As he finished speaking, footsteps could be heard in the corridor outside. Then came Lewis's voice calling my name. Stacy, stop hiding from me, okay? I know you didn't leave, you're still here. Lewis began knocking on each door one by one. The waiter was quietly trying to persuade him. After all, there were still other guests dining in the other rooms. But I knew Lewis's temper very well, the waiter couldn't stop him at all. He would soon reach this door. My body gradually tensed up. But Edward pulled me closer. Stacy, give me a kiss. I looked at the scar still visible at the corner of his eye. In the end, my heart softened. I tiptoed and gently kissed that scar. Edward then casually wrapped his arms around my waist, sat me on the nearby table. As he bent down to kiss me, Lewis was forcefully knocking on this door. Stacy, Stacy? I felt my whole body stiffen, wanting to push Edward away. But he kissed me more intensely. Stacy, he can't come in. Chapter 24. That day was truly chaotic. Lewis knocked on every door on this floor. But it happened to be the room where Edward and I were. In the end, he still couldn't get in. Just as he was going mad and preparing to break down the door, Lewis's mother forcibly pulled him away. While Edward had me in a state of confusion and infatuation. Lewis's voice calling my name had become hoarse and frantic. He probably heard the commotion inside the room. Because in the height of passion, I couldn't help but let out a cry. And when I did, Lewis's voice outside the door noticeably paused for a moment. Then the sound of kicking the door became even louder. I was so nervous that my whole body stiffened. In the end, even Edward lost control. He kept kissing me over and over. Chapter 25. It stayed quiet outside for a long time. Edward crouched down, carefully smoothing out every wrinkle on my dress. As I gradually calmed down, I felt more and more angry inside. No matter what Edward said to me, I remained silent. Finally, as we prepared to leave, Edward leaned against the door, holding my wrist. When he was serious, he didn't seem at all like the rumored playboy. I almost felt like he truly liked me. Let's be together. Chapter 26. In the end, I still didn't agree to him. Just like Lewis said before. Why would Edward like me? If it wasn't because I was Lewis's girlfriend before. Would he have gotten out of the car in the heavy rain that night to hold an umbrella for me? It's not that I intentionally think of everyone as bad. It's just that the trials and tribulations of these years keep reminding me. So I can only admonish myself like this. Don't repeat the same mistakes again. The men in their circle are not suitable for me, Stacy. On the way back when Edward dropped me off, neither of us said a word. It wasn't until the car stopped and I got out. Stacy. Edward called after me. I wasn't joking when I said that, please consider it seriously, okay? I didn't respond, nor did I turn back. All the way until I walked deep into the alley, Edward's car lights were still on. Later, someone said. That night in that shabby rental area. At the alley entrance where cars couldn't enter, a luxury car worth millions was parked there. It stayed there the entire night without moving. Chapter 27. Denise's condition gradually started to improve. When I went to visit her again, she cried with swollen eyes and told me. My sister doesn't want to get married, she ran away, but was caught and brought back. My grandfather beat her severely, her leg almost got broken. Denise held my hand, crying incoherently. Later, my uncle heard about it and rushed over overnight. He finally took my sister to the town hospital. Stacy, my uncle said, my sister was determined to seek death. Listening to Denise's words, what I thought in my heart was, if Denise and my aunt hadn't sent me away overnight all those years ago, what awaited me, Stacy, would probably be a similarly tragic fate. Denise, I will find a way, I'll bring your sister out. Ending it all is not the solution, by living, there will be new hope. But, Stacy, do you really have a way? You've just barely escaped from there. Give it a try, you must at least try. Chapter 28. I borrowed another 100,000 with even higher interest than before. Then I returned to my hometown with the 100,000. I purposely wore the best and most expensive clothes. I rented a very expensive car when returning to the village. I found my sister's father and grandfather and gave them 30,000. Let Cherry come with me to City B. I guarantee you, by working with me for a year, she can earn at least 200,000. And a year later, she's only 19, it won't delay her from marrying again. 30,000 yuan, almost equivalent to Cherry's father's annual income. They were immediately tempted. The 30,000 is an advance from me. In a year, Cherry will come back with another 170,000. How about that? I'm in urgent need of manpower over there, I have to leave tomorrow. Do you guarantee she can earn 200,000 in a year? If she can't, I will make up the remaining 20,000. I adopted a condescending attitude. I don't give out such good opportunities to just anyone. If it weren't for Denise's sake, your Cherry wouldn't have this chance. Fine, let that brat go with you for a year. Things progressed more smoothly than I had imagined. When I went to the town hospital the next day to pick up Cherry to take her away, there was a slight hiccup. My biological father, who was working outside, somehow heard about my return. He actually chartered a car back to the village overnight. As I came out of the hospital with Cherry, ready to leave, he and some people from our family blocked us. Chapter 29. Before coming back, I had already received the betrothal gifts from the other party. My biological father looked at me like a hungry wolf eyeing a piece of fat. Stacy, you were born by me, so you have to listen to me. Come with me now to get married. I didn't want to waste any more words with him. I took out my phone to call the police. But he was quicker and directly smashed my phone. I'll tell you the truth, even if you call the police, it's useless. If I want to marry off my daughter, the police can't do anything about it. Wild for so many years, finally a bit useful, can make me some money. He grabbed my arm and pushed me towards the van. Don't even think about running away, once I've taken the money, there's no way I'll give it back. Whatever amount you took, I will give you double. I tried to calm him down. But he sneered, showing his teeth, and slapped me directly. Don't play tricks with me, I've experienced more than you can imagine. I refused to get in the car, and he slapped me again. My grandfather and uncle also rushed over. Cherry stood on the side crying, begging for help. But those people stood numbly, not stepping forward. This is how it is here, a daughter's life is not a life. Daughters must get married, especially if it means a higher betrothal gift, that's a great thing. As I was pushed into the car, just as the door was about to close, suddenly, I heard the screeching sound of brakes. Edward's black Hummer was firmly blocking the van. Before anyone could react, he had already kicked my father aside and pulled me out of the car. Edward. My legs went weak, almost unable to stand. Don't be afraid, everything's fine now, I'm here, Stacy. Edward held me tightly in his arms and leaned down to kiss me firmly. He cupped my face, his fingers tracing the handprint on my cheek, his expression gradually changing. You wait for me in the car. He pushed me into the car and then locked it directly. Realizing what was happening, I threw myself against the car window, desperately calling his name. Edward just glanced back at me. The scar at the corner of his eye was still there, his smile looking both wicked and mischievous. Tears suddenly welled up in my eyes. Chapter 30. In this backward and ignorant village, many people are foolish and unaware. They don't understand what the law is, what boundaries are. Some more worldly individuals, seeing Edward's demeanor and the car he drove, knew he was either rich or noble and not to be messed with. But clearly, my despicable family members didn't consider these issues at all. They only knew that Edward had ruined their good fortune and was cutting off their source of wealth. To them, this was like asking for their lives. A group of people rushed to beat him. At first, Edward could hold his ground. But as more and more people from the clan arrived, he couldn't keep up. His head was smashed open, blood covering his face. Someone grabbed a wooden stick and struck his legs. He gritted his teeth in pain, sweating profusely, but didn't make a sound. I desperately pounded on the car window, crying out his name. Edward was being beaten to the point where he couldn't fight back. In the end, he was left battered on the ground. Fortunately, his assistant and the police from the city finally arrived. Edward was lifted into a car and immediately taken to the nearest county hospital. I waited outside the operating room, tears flowing like a flood. The last glance Edward gave me, the way he smiled at me before everything happened. It just wouldn't leave my mind. At that moment, I had no other thoughts. I only hoped he was safe and sound, and I only wished for him to wake up soon. When I was allowed to visit the ward, it was already evening. The doctor said Edward had a good foundation, so the injuries looked severe but not too serious. But as I saw the bandages wrapped around his head, almost soaked in fresh blood, I couldn't help but cry. Edward lay there, looking extremely weak. Stacy. He tried to reach out to me. Afraid he might touch the 4-needle, I quickly went over and held his hand. Am I very ugly? Tears welled up in my eyes, I chuckled, but the tears fell even more fiercely. Are you stupid? Choked up, I said. Couldn't you have come with the police? I couldn't wait. I was afraid if I delayed, you would suffer even more. He looked at my face, the handprint still somewhat visible. Does it hurt? It doesn't hurt anymore. I couldn't help but scold him again. You're the one who's injured, Edward, you fool. It's over, Stacy. What's wrong? I was almost scared to death by him. Edward lay there, lifeless. Now I'm ugly, stupid, and lost my dignity. I guess I'm really going to be a bachelor for the rest of my life. What are you saying? It made me angry and want to laugh at the same time. You had your hair shaved to treat the wound. Once it's healed, your hair will grow back, and you'll still be handsome. But you called me stupid twice just now. What if I end up with some sequelae and truly become stupid? I stared at him for a while. With tears in my eyes, I smiled at him. Then I guess I'll reluctantly marry you. Chapter 32. When Edward took me back to City B, Cherry also came with us. In addition to her, a few girls who were sold off by their families were also saved. Some went back to school, some were preparing to find a job and leave this place forever. Edward set up a foundation in my name, specifically to support girls in my hometown who had dropped out of school and orphan children abandoned by their parents. I was deeply grateful, saying thank you countless times. For myself, and for the countless girls who see hope. After returning to City B, Edward was ordered by his family to properly recover from his injuries. And I was busy with the foundation's affairs. Until the loan sharks came knocking due to the interest not being paid on time. Edward got angry with me for the first time. He helped me pay off all the debts. After those people left, Edward glared at me. Stacy, come in. I followed him into the room, and before he could speak, I quickly apologized. At that time, I had no choice. I had just graduated and was preparing for postgraduate exams. Denise was very ill, so I had to borrow money. The second time, it was because of Louis. I couldn't find a job and ended up selling things on the street, only to have them confiscated by urban management. As I mentioned this, I couldn't help but tear up. Sitting in front of Edward like a child, crying, apologizing, and admitting my mistakes. Initially, Edward must have intended to teach me a lesson. Borrowing from loan sharks should never have happened even once, let alone twice. But I cried so pitifully that he couldn't bring himself to say a harsh word. He gave me all his cards. From now on, you have me. This won't happen again. Edward wiped away my tears, feeling somewhat regretful for being harsh on me earlier. Anyway, in the future, no matter what happens, Stacy, you should think of me first. But I still prefer to rely on myself. Edward, first and foremost, I am Stacy, then I am your girlfriend. Of course, I know. I just want to tell you, when things get tough, don't push yourself too hard. I'm here. Okay. Chapter 33. Before getting engaged to Edward. During a friend's gathering, I ran into Louis. Naturally, he had heard about Edward and me getting engaged. With many people around, he openly congratulated me. I smiled and thanked him. Someone took a picture of us smiling face to face at that moment and posted it on social media. The Prince of City B and the ordinary Cinderella have a great aesthetic B together. Edward saw it somewhere. He became jealous. Stacy, do they think I'm dead? What's this aesthetic B? Is it a secret admirer sugar rush? He stayed up all night, posting on social media. Secret admiration becomes reality, the greatest joy of a lifetime. The post was accompanied by a photo of me at 18, looking very young and naive. Louis was in the photo too, standing beside me with an impatient expression on his handsome face. Edward heavily pixelated Louis out of the picture. And in the top left corner of the photo, there was a young man wearing a basketball jersey, smiling charmingly. It was a young Edward. He specifically circled himself in red to stand out. After the post went up, both Edward's and my phones blew up. I didn't have time to look at them and just pulled him aside to question. You had a secret crush on me? Edward, you secretly had a crush on me? When did this happen? You're good at hiding, huh? If you didn't confess in a fit of jealousy tonight, I would never have known, right? Yes, I had a crush on you. No, actually, it's not a secret crush, it's an open crush. Edward felt a bit uncomfortable and touched his nose. I directly confessed to you back then. Edward looked at me, his eyes filled with indulgent helplessness. But you got scared and avoided me ever since then. Gradually, I began to recall those distant memories. When I first entered university, I was particularly insecure and timid. Moreover, secretly longing for Louis in my heart, I didn't pay attention to other boys at all. I had long since forgotten about these things. Later, your roommate told me that you hated me. Edward snorted lightly. The exact words were, she smiles so maliciously and craftily, doesn't seem like a good person at all, must be playing me. My heart felt sour, unable to describe that feeling. Perhaps it was just a casual remark to his roommate at the time. But Edward, he actually remembered all these years. I'm sorry, Edward. I tugged at his sleeve and softly apologized. Just sorry? He raised an eyebrow at me. I smiled and threw myself at him, tightly hugging his neck. Then I'll take responsibility, be responsible for a lifetime, okay? Edward lowered his head and gently kissed me. Then don't smile like that at other men in the future, it makes me jealous. Okay, I'll only smile at you from now on. Stacy. Yes? I love you. I know. I tilted my face up to respond to his kiss. I love you too, Edward. Chapter 34. In the second year of Edward and my marriage, I gave birth to a beautiful daughter. That same year, Louis had an accident abroad, injuring his left arm and stayed in the hospital for a long time. Later on, he ended up marrying the nurse who took care of him. English, we held the wedding in our home country. A friend secretly told me that the bride looked a little like me. Louis's mother didn't quite like the girl, but she couldn't resist Louis's determination to marry her. I just smiled, holding my little daughter lovingly in my arms, playing with her. That night, when Edward came home from work, something seemed different from usual. We usually put our daughter to sleep together. But that night, he had the nanny take our daughter to the nursery. After a year of dating and 2 years of marriage, we had shared a bed countless times. But never like tonight. He was assertive, eager, and kept asking me to tell him I love you over and over again. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore and pinched him hard. Edward held me in his arms, looking even more aggrieved than I was. "What's wrong with you? Stacy, you are mine. Of course, I'm yours. I hate when others covet you." It was then I realized that this person, once again, was feeling jealous because Louis had married someone who resembled me a bit. Coveting but never getting, shouldn't that make you happy? No, it's annoying just thinking about that plaster-like guy. This person, 2 years into marriage, was becoming more and more childish. It was truly laughable and exasperating. All I could do was patiently comfort him. The next day, Edward suddenly suggested taking me and our daughter out to play. Unsurprisingly, we ran into Louis and his new wife. Louis introduced his wife to us. I looked at the girl, and indeed, there was a slight resemblance. Edward hugged me and spoke to Louis's wife with a smile. "This is my wife, Stacy." He then lifted our daughter from the stroller, almost wanting to show her to Louis. "This is our daughter with Stacy, isn't she beautiful? Isn't she exactly like Stacy?" He generously let Louis hold our daughter. Only when Louis couldn't keep up the charade of a smile anymore did he hastily leave with his wife. Edward was then thoroughly satisfied. Not long after, Louis and his wife moved abroad to settle. Mr. Lancaster finally stopped being jealous. Chapter 35. Another 3 years passed, and Louis divorced his wife. I heard that his wife took a large sum of money with her when she left him. One late night, I received a transoceanic call in a daze. The person on the other end of the line only said one sentence. "Stacy, I'm sorry." When Louis got divorced, an old friend of mine asked me out for tea. He told me that before Louis got married, he had spent a whole night drinking and talking with him. Louis said, when he found out I secretly had a crush on him back then. His first thought was that I was after his money and background. So, he humiliated me, made things difficult for me, was generous to everyone else, but particularly harsh on me. He just wanted to see if he couldn't get a single benefit from him, Louis. Would I then give up, show my true colors? But no matter what he did, how he treated me, I always remained kind to him, never leaving or abandoning him. That ring back then was indeed meant for another girl. But that girl rejected him and said to him, "Louis, I can't accept having a girl like Stacy around you. You actually like Stacy, not me. Stop deceiving yourself." He was furious at being exposed, a mix of embarrassment and anger. So he deliberately gave me the ring, making me his girlfriend. Originally, he planned to publicly humiliate me once I accepted the ring, revealing the truth in front of everyone. But I was so happy and content at that moment, he softened. That's how we started dating. He struggled with his growing affection for me, unable to accept that he actually liked me. So he humiliated me, constantly cheating with other girls. But when he got drunk, he would embrace me, begging for my forgiveness. Until finally, the first time I asked him for money. It was as if confirming his initial suspicions. I finally revealed my ugly true self, being with him only for his money. He hated it, refused without hesitation, and deliberately embarrassed me, making me feel ashamed. Perhaps at that time, Louis couldn't imagine. Just because of a mere 50,000, he forever lost that silly, wholeheartedly loving girl. When he eventually realized the truth about my financial situation, he was completely panicked, lost. And then, he made one mistake after another, descending into a spiral where there was no chance of recovery. A friend mentioned Louis's current situation again. I interrupted with a smile. "I'm sorry, I have to go home now, my husband and daughter are here to pick me up." Outside the window, Edward was getting out of the car, holding our daughter. When he saw me, he immediately smiled. The way he smiles, it's both mischievous and endearing. The sun was shining brightly, the spring weather was perfect. I waved to them, stood up, and walked outside.